Larry Williams from TigerIllustrated.com. So, Mr. Williams, thanks for being with us this afternoon.
Glad to be with you guys.
Just talk a little bit about what you do for TigerIllustrated.com and a couple of the books you wrote with Danny Ford and a couple of the other ones.
Yeah, I've been with Tiger Illustrated for a little over 5 years, covering Clemson football on a daily basis. Usually that's about 365 days a year. There's always something going on with Clemson football. Been covering Clemson in general since 2004. Previous to that was with the Charleston Post and Courier until coming over to Tiger Illustrated in 2008. And the two books, the first one is on the history of the Clemson-South Carolina football rivalry, or South Carolina-Clemson, depending on your allegiance. Wrote that with ESPN writer Travis Haney, who was then in South Carolina working for the Post and Courier. That came out in 2011. It's called State of Disunion. And the other one was on the history of Danny Ford's time at Clemson from the late 70s until I guess February of 1990. So had a lot of fun doing both of them.
Talk a little bit, I mean, like we were talking with Chris earlier, give us your grade on the 2013 season for the Tigers, how it ended up, obviously 11-2 record, very similar to last year with the win in the Orange Bowl.
I'd say an A-minus. Just the minus there because of another loss to South Carolina. I think that streak, it becomes a much bigger deal the longer it grows, simply because Clemson and its fans are not used to losing that way. It's the longest streak in the rivalry's history, all of them by double digits. Losing the way they used to beat South Carolina over the years traditionally does not sit well with Clemson folks, and I think it doesn't sit well with Dabo Swinney and his staff and players either. So, I think that it was a really good season. Anytime you win 10 or 11 games, it's a really good season. That hadn't been done at Clemson in a long time before the Tigers did it in 2011 while winning the ACC title. So a lot to be happy about this season, but I think that what happened at the end kind of leaves a smudge, and they just got to get that turned around. I think that's one of the biggest things on the minds of Clemson fans right now, and certainly it's a big objective inside the football office as well.
Well, we'll talk a little bit about, the Orange Bowl win, how big it was for the program on a national stage. First BCS win in South Carolina. Just expand on that a little bit, if you could.
Well, it's really big because, that was, that game was a really high-profile game. I think it was a good bit different from 2 years ago when Clemson played West Virginia. I think going into bowl season that year, there were several other games that were, I guess, more marquee matchups than that one. Well, this time around, arguably, Ohio State versus Clemson came second to the BCS title game in terms of the appeal and the marketability. Maybe the Rose Bowl, I think you can make a case for that one as well. But my point is, it was a big stage game. It was a game against a really, really good Ohio State team that had only lost one time over the previous 2 years, against a great coach and two great players in Braxton Miller and Carlos Hyde. What really stood out to me, my biggest takeaway from that game was how Clemson physically held up in that game, because I thought Ohio State was a slight favorite going in. It was a toss-up in my opinion, but I thought Ohio State had a whisker of an edge by virtue of the fact, or I guess the assumption on my part and a lot of other people's part, that Ohio State was going to be the more physical team. That absolutely was not the case. Clemson's defensive line and linebackers they showed up and just pummeled Braxton Miller and Carlos Hyde. And when you have a big old back like Carlos Hyde limping to the sideline and clearly in some significant pain, that's an accomplishment. And so, I think that combined with the LSU win and the Chick-fil-A Bowl a year ago, did a lot for the credibility of Clemson's program. I think, as Dabo Swinney said, he said, we haven't reached the top of the mountaintop. We can see it. And the margin of defeat against Florida State this season shows that, or it indicates, I guess, that there's still a ways to go. But it was the culmination of a really remarkable, special 3-year run. They didn't do everything they wanted to do, but closing it in that fashion, beating a really good Ohio State team on the big stage was big for the program, and it eliminated it reduced the really sour taste. Had they lost that game, it would not have been a fun off season. But I think now, as a result of pulling that win out, it's a much different deal, and I think it gave Clemson more respect nationally by being able to win a game like that.
Right. Well, looking ahead, 2014 obviously lose a lot of playmakers on offense, and with Breland coming out too, and maybe possibly Vic Beasley. Just talk about that, and some of the holes they're going to have to fill, and obviously a pretty challenging schedule looking ahead to next year.
Yeah, the biggest, obviously, Todd and Sammy leaving. I mean, those were the figureheads. Those were the guys who were basically rock stars the last 3 years. I know Nuke Hopkins was a great weapon and did so many special things, but Sammy and Taj, they were just on a different level in terms of what I said, just being sort of figureheads and just the real game changers and the sort of celebrities. So that's the biggest issue right there, in my opinion. I wonder, or I guess I would guess that the offense, scheme-wise, is going to have to be recalibrated a bit because you're not going to have the vertical passing threat that Todd Boyd gave you. You're not going to find many quarterbacks that have his combination of not just a strong arm, not being able to just wing it deep, but wing it accurately. It was very rare that he was not accurate on a deep ball and did not hit a guy in stride, and that is not easy to do. And then Sammy, I think, there's no explanation necessary when you talk about his loss. And so, I think they're going to have to maybe shift and lean more on the running game with whoever is the quarterback, probably more zone read, kind of approach similar to what you see at Auburn. And really, we saw a lot of it in the Orange Bowl. I think the schematics on offense in the Orange Bowl were a good bit different from what we saw over the 12-game regular season. We saw a lot more of the jet motion and horizontal stuff that you see with the Gus Malzahn, Chad Morris approach. And I think they'll have to lean on the defense a good bit more. Not that they didn't this year. The defense really showed up in a lot of instances, particularly in the last game. And I think the key on defense, even though they're going to lose Breland, as you mentioned, probably whatever you want to call it, lose Vic Beasley. I would say probably at this point, though I could be wrong. Then losing Spencer Stewie, that's a big loss. But the key to me is that middle. I think they can withstand the loss of Beasley because you have Shaq Lawson to plug in there, who I think is going to be a beast before it's all said and done. The real game changers are in the middle. For Grady Jarrett, DJ Reader, Deshaun Williams, and Josh Watson, and then Carlos Watkins didn't even play this year for much of the year, and then behind them, Stephon Anthony. That's where you can really impose your will, I guess, for lack of a better phrase. That's where I feel good about things. If you can dominate up front and you have a really good linebacker who can plug those holes and diagnose and and make dynamic plays, then I think you're going to be okay on defense. But it's going to be different. It's going to be just, I don't know if rebuilding is the word, but you can certainly make the case that's what's in store for them. Schedule, I guess the major obstacles at Georgia in the first game, and at Florida State, and then South Carolina, kind of similar to this year. And so, I sort of anticipate, if you ask me to guess, I would say perhaps they drop down to the 9-win level, and if they can maintain the double-digit win streak, then that would be a heck of a coup for Dabo Swinney and this program and what they're doing.
Well, I totally agree there. Once again, we're talking to Larry Williams from TigerIllustrated.com. And before we let you get out of here this afternoon, talk a little bit about with National Signing Day coming up in February, the recruiting class that Clemson's, putting together, the major offers they still have out there. It's become such a huge part of college football now. Can't recruit, you can't really win. So just talk about that a little bit. And thanks again for being with us.
Sure thing. And I tell you what, as far as recruiting goes, I'm not going to insult the intelligence of you or your listeners by pretending to know what I'm talking about as far as that goes. We have Paul Strelo, who's our excellent recruiting analyst, who does that day in and day out. And so I usually stay away from it and defer to him. But you talk about this class, I just mentioned two departing figureheads in Sammy Watkins and Taj Boyd. And one thing you don't want to do as you talk about, the greatness of the departing players is to create the impression that the cupboard is bare. It really isn't. I mean, they have a lot of guys coming back. And then, oh, by the way, you have Deshaun Watson, who is, by all accounts, a potential stud, another potential sort of figurehead, game changer that you're going to have at quarterback. I don't know that he's going to be able to come in right away and make a big splash and take the starting job, but he's an early enrollee. I know that Chad Morris is really, really excited about him and is not discounting the notion that he can come in and take the job. But I don't know if he's going to be able to do it. If you're thinking of the opener in Athens, is Watson going to be the one trotting out there on the first drive? That's kind of a scary thought, I think, in the minds of a lot of Clemson fans. But, it's not as though there are scrubs he's going to be competing with this spring. You have Cole Stout, who is kind of the smooth operator senior who's played every year and did a really good job this year when he was pressed into duty, most notably against Georgia Tech when Taj Boyd went down with an injury. And then Chad Kelly, who was very decorated as a high school player, who was salivating to get some playing time, and not just to get some playing time, but to start. So that should be a really intriguing battle. And, I think sort of scanning the rest of the recruiting class, Artavis Scott, the receiver, I think is going to, with the departures of Watkins and Martavis Bryant, I think he's going to be definitely a candidate to be thrust in there, and they'll see what he can do. And they're recruiting. You mentioned we talked about Florida State earlier. The difference between Clemson and Florida State right now, I think that we've seen the last 2 years when they played on the field, and of course the other night when Florida State won the BCS title, is that there's a difference between recruiting really well and recruiting like gangbusters. And Florida State has done the latter. Clemson has done the former. And so recruiting never stops. And certainly I think that coaching staff and the fans know that they have a heck of an obstacle in their division with the Seminoles, the defending BCS champs, and also Louisville coming in with Bobby Petrino, a really good coach. And so the one thing about Dabo Swinney and his staff, they've always been really good at bringing in good classes and closing the deal on big-name guys. And they certainly did that with Deshaun Watson and keeping him in the fold over a 2.5-year recruiting battle, basically against everybody. So kudos to him for that.
Right. Well, Mr. Williams, thanks again for being with us this afternoon. We appreciate it, and we'd love to get you back on sometime. But thanks again.
Sure thing.
All right, that's Larry Williams from TigerIllustrated.com.